Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, November 3rd, 2024, and happy 4-year anniversary of the 2020 presidential election. 4 years ago today, we were covering the election results as they came in and discussing the implications of the 2020 presidential between Vice President Joe Biden, or then Vice President Joe Biden, and at the time, President Donald Trump. And 4 years later, we have Donald Trump back on the ballot here. It feels surreal seeing Donald Trump actually on the ballot this time. This is my first time actually voting in a presidential election. It's a really exciting time for, I think, many people across the country on both sides of the aisle. And it's just been a very big whirlwind. I was first watching Donald Trump run for office when I was in the summer of my 7th grade year going into my 7th grade year. Donald Trump was elected when I was finishing middle school, and now he's still running for president, and I finished college in May. And so it's been quite a wild ride watching the Trump train. It could go on for 4 more years, possibly after this election, but it is 4 years since that 2020 election. And as is standard in the final stretch of any campaign period, very high-quality pollsters release their final results, their final indications as to how they believe the nation will go based on the data that they collect and they process and bring out top-line numbers. Now, the New York Times Siena College poll has been a whirlwind for the entire election season. 3 months ago, when Joe Biden was still on the ticket, or roughly 3.5 months ago, Donald Trump led Joe Biden by momentous amounts in many battleground states. In some cases, he led the former Democratic nominee and the incumbent president, Joe Biden, by a massive amount, 9 to 12 points in states like Georgia and Arizona. And the massive lead here can largely be attributed to the fact that voters were much less willing to back President Joe Biden in comparison to Vice President Kamala Harris, who has seemingly returned the Sun Belt to the Democratic ticket in the final stretch of the campaign season, with the exception of Arizona, in a time where Democrats are looking for multiple pathways to 270 electoral votes. And so in the final New York Times Siena College poll, an A-plus rated pollster, which has had its own problems, I will admit, on the national level. I think it's very interesting that sometimes they have a tie nationally, but Harris leading in multiple battleground states, completely shattering our understanding of the popular vote, electoral vote, and any electoral vote or electoral college bias that Democrats may or may not have. What I've come to understand, though, is I am more focused on the statewide polls rather than the national ones, because at the end of the day, our elections are decided by the Electoral College, not the national popular vote. And so I'm sure you've been staring at the numbers on your screen, and if you watched the video yesterday about Iowa, you already know that there is something weird going on with polling. And it comes in a way that doesn't even feel reminiscent of 16 or 20 in any of its overestimation ends. The Seltzer poll in Iowa, a poll that has been right for the past 12 years with consistency. The first poll and the only poll to say that Barack Obama would have a solid victory in the Iowa caucus in 2008. That was the poll there that put Ann Seltzer really on the map. In 2012, she nailed the margin. In 2014, she predicted the red wave. In 2016, she predicted Trump's victory. In 2020, she showed Trump would perform similarly in Iowa when every other poll said that he wouldn't. And in 2022, she got the Senate margin exactly right. And for the first time since 2012, she has a Democrat leading in the state of Iowa. Now, I don't think Kamala Harris will win Iowa, but there is merit in seeing the shifts amongst independent women and late deciders that have ultimately shifted the election odds largely in favor of Kamala Harris. And hear me out on this point. So, what do the New York Times Siena College polls say? Nevada, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Georgia, all states Kamala Harris holds an advantage in. Yes, you heard that correctly. Nevada, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Georgia. It's a weird rotation of states that you honestly don't expect to vote all together, right? It honestly would be shocking to me if Arizona was 4 points to the right, like this poll is saying, and North Carolina is 2 points to the left. But that's what the New York Times and Siena College are actually saying. And they're finding that Pennsylvania and Michigan are ties. It's a reduction in support from where Harris had previously led. And they're seeing that Donald Trump is skewing, and not skewing, but rather winning over some of their late deciders. Some of the voters in those states, the low turnout voters that don't vote in midterms, don't vote in special elections, don't vote in off-year elections, but will vote in the presidential election if and only if the condition is met that Donald Trump is on the ballot. And so that's where Donald Trump is getting those strong numbers in Pennsylvania and Michigan. But seeing the rest of them really come in, it is fascinating to say the least. Now, to give you a better visual aid of what this means, I've decided to just zero out those other battleground states. I normally have my electoral prediction up and we adjust from there. What I'm going to do here is just apply the New York Times numbers so you can see exactly why this is quite surprising. For instance, Arizona being a 4-point state, that's a lean red state. Michigan and Pennsylvania are tied. I'm not going to touch those. In fact, I'm going to make the toss-up a better color here because I just like the numbers to be more, or the colors to be more in contrast with one another. But Nevada, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Georgia. in this circumstance would all become lean Democratic states. So Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, and Nevada. And the good news for Kamala Harris is that it leads to an electoral college victory. It just leads to an ugly map. And the reason I say that is because what it would result in is possible flips in Michigan and Pennsylvania, and, Harris flipping North Carolina and holding on to Georgia, Wisconsin, and Nevada while losing Arizona. It's really a wild ride. And I think also, too, the fact remains that what we have come to understand about this election is that a lot of the times these coalitions vote in voting blocks. The Rust Belt votes together and the Sun Belt votes together. And for a while, it seemed like that was going to be the case. A good example of this is when you take a look at the 538 forecast, which maintains its belief that Donald Trump wins the presidential election. But just take a look at the data that you can see in some of these states. For instance, in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, these have largely been the states that have been the best for Vice President Harris, getting out of Nevada, which is a state that historically has been good for Democrats. But look at it, right? No state here on this seven swing state map is better for Kamala Harris than Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin. Arizona's Trump 68, Georgia's Trump 63, North Carolina's Trump 63, and Nevada's Trump 54. Pennsylvania has Trump ahead, but barely, 52 to 48. But Michigan is pretty solid. Harris is at 57 to 43. Wisconsin's pretty solid, 55 to 45. And so seeing these three states, again, traditionally expected to vote together, the data generally clumps them in together. Now that they're disconnected, I genuinely have to ask, why is it that might be? And I also think, too, that Ann Seltzer poll in Iowa, I'm not sure if they threw it into the margin here. Yes, they did. And it didn't really change much. I think that Iowa has always been a state that Donald Trump was destined to win, and one poll isn't going to skew it too heavily off from what it was. But looking at the rest of what that could mean for some of the other states, for instance, the gold standard poll out of Kansas showed Kamala Harris within 5 points in the state. I don't think that will be the margin, but a 10-point victory for Trump is a reduction that will be felt everywhere. It's a reduction that also can be indicated by Nebraska's second, where Kamala Harris is on track for potentially a double-digit victory in a district Biden won by 7 and Trump won by 2 in the 4 years previous. And the fascinating part of it all, too, is that after redistricting in 2020, and I know some people had questions about that, and so after redistricting in 2020, what happened here was that Nebraska's second actually became 3 points more conservative. And so for Nebraska's second, a very good indicator of what white suburban regions of this country might look like in this election cycle. Kamala Harris has been dominating in that district. She's been doing really well in Iowa, doing really well in Kansas in comparison to where Clinton was, and Biden won the election. And that could actually bode really good news for the Rust Belt states. Now, they dive deep into a bit more, topics of conversation. They talk about undecideds. They talk about abortion. They talk about how people were voting on the Senate level. And generally speaking, in some states, good example is Michigan, where the electorate still is more skewed towards Democrats than Republicans. Elisa Slotkin holds a lead over Mike Rogers, who served in Congress from Michigan, ran for Senate this cycle, and she holds about a 2-point lead when Harris and Trump are tied, which means she, at minimum, is outrunning the vice president. Now, it wasn't always like that. Michigan and Elisa Slotkin with Harris and her margins were often roughly similar. Since recently, we've seen Elisa Slotkin sort of peel away. She's had a bigger appeal and broader appeal to independent and conservative voters, but it isn't too heavy to say that if one loses, the other would win, or that one wins, the other loses. That sounds a little confusing. The point being here, I think the direction of the state will vote together in the Senate race. I don't really see a circumstance in which Michigan's going red and the Senate race is going blue, unless it really is going to be decided by less than half a point, which I don't think we're at that point now. But regardless, I'm taking the data and really internalizing it because North Carolina and Georgia really throw me for a loop. Wisconsin and Nevada, I could believe you. Biden won Nevada by roughly 3. Wisconsin being a 2-point margin isn't that surprising. It's a margin that is similar to that of Biden's in the last election. But North Carolina and Georgia are unique points of interest for me because these are states that Democrats actually have shown quite large amounts of concern here as to, can they hold on to Georgia, but also a lot of optimism around North Carolina. Now, if you look at the places Donald Trump has been traveling, unfortunately, I don't have the map up for you today, but where Donald Trump has been traveling over the past, 3 months, or 2 months, August 5th through October 25th, so about 2.5 months here, Donald Trump spent more rallies in North Carolina than in Nevada, in Arizona, in Wisconsin, in Michigan. In every instance, you find that Donald Trump, Pennsylvania being an exception here, North Carolina held precedent over many of these other very much bigger, not bigger, but much more important battleground states, because if Donald Trump's campaign was secure and solid in the states he won in the last election, they would not have been visiting North Carolina 10 plus times, right? They visited the state more than Kamala Harris has, and Kamala Harris has been playing offense in the state. She's looking to flip that state. And the Trump campaign has been reaffirmed to all of their donors, all of their campaign staff, that they're solid in the states they won. They don't need to worry. then why are you spending so much time there? And I think it speaks to a broader point here that the North Carolina numbers haven't been phenomenal for Donald Trump. For a state that he won in the last election, it is baffling to me that Arizona is expected to vote to the right of North Carolina, and that Georgia might too. And just looking at the data points that we get out of the states, now granted, this doesn't have the New York Times poll, but it has been very rare that we have seen Kamala Harris lead in any polls. But the majority of the polls that are coming through aren't high-quality ones. Atlas Intel, which has gotten lucky in the past, clearly has a Republican bias. Redfield and Whitland Strategies does not have a high rating. YouGov and the Times, it's pretty good. Trump only leads by 1. And so I will also say, too, the only poll here that I really have come to be very interested by is the CNN SSRS poll, which I think will end up aging well, and the race will be a 1-point margin. But you can see here, right? I don't think Trump is up 3-4 points, while simultaneously the A+ New York Times poll is showing Kamala Harris up by 2. I think we're somewhere closer to the middle, and I think Donald Trump has the upper hand in North Carolina. But the fact that this state is so close is a telling sign that on the larger end, Donald Trump isn't doing as well as he would like. And the fact remains, too, about these New York Times polls. If they are correct, Donald Trump can win Michigan. He can win Pennsylvania, even just by the narrowest margins or largest margins. It doesn't matter. He still loses the election. Kamala Harris would be the 47th president of the United States of America. That's a really daunting reality for Republican folks. I think when you look at a lot of the data points that have been out over the past week, not many of them have been indicating that Kamala Harris is going to lose many battlegrounds. You can see that although the national has narrowed, right? She used to hold a pretty substantive advantage nationwide, 2-3 points. It has since narrowed up to a point, but take a look, right? Pennsylvania's even, but Donald Trump enjoyed a week of leading. North Carolina is less than a point, but Donald Trump enjoyed a week of being up 2 to 3 points, right? You can see Michigan is close, as always. Nevada, now closer than it was before. Wisconsin, building back out. What was a tie about roughly a week ago is now building back out. Georgia is narrowing down. Arizona's the only one, and that's largely because of that New York Times poll, that has expanded for Donald Trump. But beyond that, Arizona push away. You still win the election if you're Kamala Harris based on these numbers. Especially if you look at the very strong poll from Ann Seltzer yesterday. If you are Kamala Harris, based on that poll, you undoubtedly win the election. Now, it's not here to say the Democrats should ever feel complacent, because this election truly is a toss-up. And even with all this data indicating that Kamala Harris is in a strong position today and a stronger position, 538 is still convinced that she's in a worse off position. Yesterday, the national forecast was 50 to 49. I'm surprised to see that it's all of a sudden 53 to 47, but Atlas Intel has been pumping data out and turning it around in 24 hours. Really interesting there. Point being, though, Trump-Harris are in a complete and total toss-up. And these numbers and undecideds and late breakers here that really do make a difference in some of these states. People who are deciding right up until Election Day, when Republicans are hoping there is a massive surge of Republican support. If these numbers hold true, the early vote has already voted for Kamala Harris, and we're going to see that counted throughout the evening. Some states have already tabulated, some states have not. Since 2020, a number of states have changed their laws to accurately reflect what the numbers will show for both candidates. But here's where we are. If late decideds, undecideds that are this late in the game are breaking for Kamala Harris, it's a recipe for victory. An early vote number that is already strong, that in the closing arguments and the final stretch of days, if Kamala Harris is able to win these states, it feels a lot like 2016, except this time, Donald Trump is Hillary Clinton. A wave of overconfidence and choosing VP picks that are not great for the ticket, and a number of different things that ultimately boil down to a level of overconfidence that did do damage to the Hillary Clinton campaign that we could see exhibited with Donald Trump. Holding rallies in states you're not going to win. Look at Trump in Virginia yesterday, New Mexico 3 days ago, New York 10 days or 7 days ago. These are mistakes, and these are things only done by campaigns that genuinely believe they're in this race to win by a massive margin and not in this race to win. But I think the data has grounded us and shown us that in these final days, Kamala Harris has brought back many states in the Sun Belt, Nevada, North Carolina, and Georgia, and remaining competitive in the Rust Belt. The exact combination of what she needs, given the early voting numbers, to win the presidential election. Full force ahead on both sides, though, because everything will be decided over the next 48 hours. But it is interesting to me that the data is breaking almost entirely in favor of the vice president in the final stretch of this campaign season for a race that is expected to be and could be one of the closest of the century and could be the closest election we've had in a very, very long time. And so all eyes on a number of these battleground states as they get their final $10, $20 million dumped into the states. The final rally of the campaign for both campaigns will be held in Pennsylvania tomorrow. The Pittsburgh one will be the final one for Trump. The Philadelphia one will be the final one for Harris. 1 day left of campaigning after today, 2 days until Election Day. 4 days until we roughly know who the next president of the United States will be. 4 days, full force ahead until we know. 2 days until voting begins. Fascinating, fun next 48 hours. Very stressful, but fun next 48 hours. And it'll be a really, really good race to watch, I think, on election night. And I think it's going to be really close. I think it's going to cause a lot of problems because of how close it is, unfortunately, given where we are on national views of election security. That's the most stressful part about it. But beyond that, though, this is a campaign we have been watching in full force for the past 3 months, with Harris at the top of the ticket and with Biden at the top of the ticket for the past 3.5 years. And the fact that it is all coming to an end feels surreal. And the fact that the 2020 presidential election was 4 years ago today feels surreal. But that's the nature of elections. They really sneak up on you as they sneak up on candidates. And I think it's going to be, again, a race to watch, and certainly one for the history books, regardless of who wins. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.